All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I'm very excited about this conversation that we're about to have. I'm really just honored to be joined by not only a guy who I have two bands in common with, and we'll get into
Maybe
all
more.
that,
Maybe more. We'll figure that out as we go
possibly,
along.
possibly, but somebody who is an inspiration to me as a drummer. Someone who came up in the Jersey scene, the same scene I did, different times, but we connected a lot over the years. And somebody who's still active doing music, and I want to get into all that. But first of all, it's my pleasure to welcome from my home state of New Jersey, Mr. John Steele. John, how's it going, man?
Good, man. Good. Good to see you. I think the last time I saw you was at the VFW show in Lodi.
Yeah,
Well, I
down.
don't know if you have. I'll send. There's a picture that we all took with Chris Morantz and Jim Foster and Steve Miller. I don't know if you have a copy of that, but if you don't, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I do for sure. I think Chris from Morning Noise was photobombing us.
Yeah,
'Cause
he does that a lot. He's great at
yeah,
that. I love that.
I love those guys. Yeah, because we had all these different EF people there at one time,
Yeah.
Miller and
Yep. Yep.
so it was kind of cool. And I was thinking that the time before, the last time I saw you before then was Los Angeles in 2004. I was living out in LA and EF had come through. It was you and Bill Gill in the band, Miller and Sal, and you played the Echo
Yes.
out in LA.
Yeah.
So
I don't remember seeing you there. I remember that's interesting. I remember running into you in Asbury Park when EF played, and I think the Undead was playing that day, but you weren't playing with him.
the Undead was supposed to play. I was out of the band at that point. They had Joey Image playing drums.
Okay.
Um, as you might well imagine, Bobby and Joey had some issues. So the Undead never showed up.
That's right. I remember that. You're right. Because about a year before that, we played with the Undead in England at
Hmm.
the Holidays in the Sun Festival or something, some Blackpool. It was like Dead Kennedys and Exploited. It was a lot of big bands there, and they were there.
And that
And that's
was Joey with them?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Joey was there. Yeah,
Yeah, it was probably Joey and Bryce was probably playing bass.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's it's crazy how the years and the places around the world kind of we're all crisscrossing each other, man.
yeah. We run into each other somewhere at some point. I don't remember seeing you in LA though. That's good memory. I didn't remember that.
Yeah, you were out there with El Nada, I think, was the other.
Yeah, we did a couple of tours with El Nada. That was those were fun days. The
And
Echo I think was in Silver Lake if I don't remember
yes,
correctly.
yes.
Yeah, okay, now I remember.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
and London May was there. He came out
London was
for
there.
that
That's
show.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
because
I think we stayed at his house that time. Well, we stayed at his house pretty much every time we played in LA. So that was probably no exception.
yeah, London was cool. The first time I met him because years ago I'd done an interview with Steve for Sam Hain for the Aquarian, and we put Sam Hain on the cover. And you introduced me to London, and he's like, "That's the first cover story I've ever had." He was like excited. I'm like, "Yeah, mine too." First time I ever got
Yeah.
paid to write a cover story was Sam Hain.
That's funny.
Yeah, and so we got a lot to talk about, my friend.
Yeah, we do. We do. We
Um,
can let's a couple of pots of black coffee and we'll be ready to go.
hey man, I'm all set. I'm way ahead of but
Where do
let's
you want to start?
let's start at the beginning when it comes to drums. When did drumming first enter your life and will become such a big part of it?
I was 5 or 6, and my cousin was a drummer, and we used to go over his house all the time. And he had a set of drums, and I started, and he used to play, and I watched him play, and then all of a sudden, I decided, let me give it a try. And as primitive as it was as a 5 or 6 year old, I kind of had something. And we would go over there, and I would play, and I would just get better and better. Um, and he actually turned me on to Alice Cooper. The first song I ever played drums to was "School's Out,"
Mm.
and it was probably that album had probably just came out. And my cousin, he was a big influence on me musically. My brother was a big influence on me musically, turned me onto a lot of stuff at that time period: Sabbath, Zeppelin, Iron Butterfly, all kinds of stuff. And eventually I got a set of drums. My much to my mom's uh, chagrin, my dad decided to get me a set of drums, and I started playing. And like a lot of kids did at the time, I guess, you put a record on, you put the headphones on, you start playing, and it was all kinds of stuff. Music in my house was a big thing as a kid. My parents were, my parents were big music fans. Everything from, you know, Italian wedding music and, you know, American songbook type stuff, Sinatra, all that type of, you know, to Chicago and Jay Giles band. My sister was really into music. My brother, like I said, turned me on to all the hard rock and heavy metal. The first time I heard the first Sabbath album as a kid, I was terrified, and I loved it right away, like a lot of people, you know. So that's where the drumming for me started. And then, I just kept playing as I got older. My first real band, I played with a bunch of kids from my neighborhood, but nothing really serious. And then my first real band was started in late 82 into 83, which was the System. And I was a kid, I was 14. And then, we broke into the aforementioned, with you talk about, I think you talked about this with Kaprowski, like the dirt club scene. The dirt club punk scene was kind of happening right about then, and we were a punk band.
Hmm.
I got turned on to punk when I was probably about seventh grade by an eighth grader who, the usual stuff: Pistols and Dead Boys and Damned, and everything coming out of England, and excuse me, stuff like that. So yeah, the guys were older than me, and I was a kid being dragged around to these clubs. But that was it. That was the start. That's when I started, really like playing out,
Hmm.
in my first real band. But then also at that time, I was also, I had a guitar, so I was kind of learning guitar at the same time as I was playing drums when I was like 14. So, guitar and drums kind of went hand in hand with me as a kid. I wasn't very good at it, still not that good at it, but I do what I can. Um, I'm a drummer, but I'm a guy who plays guitar. I'm not a guitarist. I play guitar, but I
Right.
am a drummer. So drums are my first instrument, my first love.
Well, I'm curious about how you came up as a drummer, because one thing about your playing, there's a lot of drummers who play, the style of Electric Frankenstein who you played in, and a lot of bands sound like Backseat Driver in a lot of ways, but not many drummers sound like you. And I'll break that down because,
Thank you.
well, one thing, because we'll get into this later, but I followed you in a couple of bands, so I had to learn your style. Um, you have a very expressive drumming style. What I mean by that is you're not a basher. You have these really cool, because I had to study your shit, man. You have some ebbs and flows in your playing, meaning that you understand dynamics, you understand quiet and soft, you understand tempo, and kind of keeping it. The drummer I would compare you to in a lot of ways is Bill Ward, who self
Excellent.
he
Excellent.
describes himself as
I'm
a,
honored. I'm honored. He's
yeah.
one of my favorite drummers. Him and Bonham, my two guys.
Well, he will
That's it.
I've talked to him about drumming, and he has described himself as a quote unquote orchestral drummer. And I hear that in your playing too, where it's almost like the way a jazz drummer would approach a hard rock band. Like take a
Well,
jazz drummer and drop him into like the New York Dolls. I mean,
there's
Jerry,
an explanation. There's an explanation for that, and that's because when I was a kid, and like I was saying about my parents listening to a lot of uh, American music. My parents were children of immigrants, so their parents kind of tried to assimilate to America. So, and jazz, and my parents were born in the 20s, so jazz was very popular in the 30s and 40s, and they listened to that type of stuff. And my older uncles would say, Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa,
Mm,
these types of guys. I mean, they were the drummer of the band, but they pretty much were like the conductors of the band. Like they were guiding the band with what they were doing. And that, I mean, obviously people like Bill Ward and Bonham and Mitch Mitchell, a lot of those, they all kind of listened to that stuff growing up as well. But I learned about how to, like you said, take it down a little bit, pick it up a little bit, you know, uh, roles and tastefulness and basically kind of playing off each other like the jazz drummers, would do. And that was an early lesson of mine,
hmm.
you know, because a lot of the bands that I listened to, like Sabbath and Zeppelin, and even Charlie Watts, who's, a lot of people shit on him, but he's one of my favorite drummers. He's great in his own way. I'm sure you will agree.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, Same thing. They all learned from the jazz guys. So, like you say, you take a jazz influence. Not that I was a jazz fan, but that style of playing,
Right.
I worked it into what I was doing. It was organically happened, and that's kind of, I guess that's where my style came from.
Yeah, it's a very distinct sound, especially in the bands you've played in. Like I know there've been a lot of drummers in EF, both of us, for one. But I always know when it's you playing. I don't have
Thank
to
you.
read the liner notes. I'm like, well, that's John Steele, I know that sound, and even when you've done more kind of, let's say, fast hardcore stuff, which we'll get into as well with Holeshot,
Mhm.
your style is there, so it's cool. I had a feeling that the jazzy thing was going to be a part of the picture because I can
Mhm.
fucking hear it every time you
Yeah.
play a song.
Thank you.
As far as earlier bands, and you've been in a lot of bands, we're probably not going to hit them all during this conversation, but one I did want to ask you about, because they're very infamous if you're from Jersey and you're kind of following punk, infamous and kind of legendary for some interesting reasons. Um, that band, of course, is Genocide. So how in the world did you get wrapped up with Bobby Ads, first of all? And
That's a uh, well, all right, I'll tell you exactly. Genocide played a show with Voice of Doom,
mhm,
okay? And uh, Frankie Fender, who is in Voice of Doom and who was also in my first band, System, and he's the original VO.D guitar player with me. Um, he was, we were talking. He's like, wow, I can't believe Genocide's still around. He's like, I saw them at A7 like years ago. I'm like, you did? He's like, yeah. He's like, I think they went on at like 5 o'clock in the morning or something. You know, like, fucking, and they had a listen. The Driscoll Bridge to me is the Mason Dixon line of New Jersey. So I was from the North Jersey scene. They were from the Central Jersey scene. Totally, you know, just I don't know what rock a lot of their people crawled out from under. Interesting bunch of people. Yes, infamous, dangerous, interesting. Just Ebbs was a character. Without a doubt. And then after Voice of Doom broke up, Frankie and I were doing another band called Nasty Ammunition, and we played with Genocide again. With the Skulls were on that bill too. I don't know if you remember the Skulls.
oh sure, yeah, Charlie.
So, Bobby came up to me. He's like, "Oh, I don't know you play drums." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a guitar player, play drums." And he's like, "Oh, my drummer's leaving." He's like, "You want to play? You want to join?" And I'm like, okay, why not? I was in my early 20s or whatever, and I had a shit ton of energy to do whatever. I'm like, okay, I'm going to play in this band on Wednesdays. I'm going to play in this band on Thursdays. And, I said, well, also they were a little more popular than what I was doing. And, I was like, well, they play some good shows, or at least they did. They played they had a lot of fans in the
Mhm.
Central Jersey area and in the North Jersey area. But it wasn't too long before I was only in that band for about a year, maybe a year and a half, and about halfway through that, Bobby dropped the Genocide name and it went to Gutter Cat. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, no, I'm not actually.
Yeah. Because it was me, Bobby, Rock and Roll Bob Sexton, and Pete Powers. And Pete Marshall actually came down one night to audition for second guitar. And he, I know Pete kind of had a little relationship with Bobby or whatever. And Pete came down for one rehearsal and then never did it again. But Eb said, nobody will book us. We couldn't play the Court Tavern, couldn't play anywhere. The only place we could play was the Lismar Lounge. And we played there a couple of times. He's like, I'm dropping the Genocide name. From now on, it's just going to be called Gutter Cat, because nobody knew who Gutter Cat was, so that we
Right.
couldn't play any. Nobody would book him because how he was. He was a normal human being 90% of the time, but then when he was out there, he was just he was like the Iggy Pop of New Jersey. You never
Right.
knew what he was going to do. You know that.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and the shows were disasters. He would just be totally fucked up, and his girlfriends would all be on stage with him, and it was you thought it was going to be really good, and some shows were good, but a lot of shows he was out there, and we didn't even complete a bunch of them. Like we would like kind of stopped halfway through or did a bunch of songs without him. We did get a recording out of it though. That's one thing that Bobby had a friend of his that he had a lot of like he had an entourage with him constantly, girls and guys, and he was he was like the Andy Warhol or whatever of New Brunswick, I guess, and a friend of his funded us to go into Tracks East and South River to record, and that recording is out there. Rock and Roll Bob Sexton actually reissued a picture disc of it maybe about 12, 13 years ago, but it's on YouTube. If you search like Genocide Gutter Cat, you'll find it. And it's actually pretty good. I hadn't heard it in 20 something years. And then when I heard it, I was like, wow, this was actually pretty good.
Hmm.
But it was an interesting ride. It really was. And I don't remember exactly what happened to it. I think oh, Rock and Roll Bob moved. He moved to California. He just said, I'm done with this, and he was out of here, and that was pretty much it. The band just fell apart, and you know I still see Pete every once in a while at Chiller Theater Convention. But it was interesting. It was fun. It was a shit show, but it was a fun shit show.
Well, speaking of shit shows, the first time I ever heard of Bobby Ebbs, I was in grade school and I was reading the East Coast Rocker one day, Jersey reference through and through. And Gigi played somewhere down at the shore. So it was a review of Gigi's show. And apparently, Ebb showed up to see Gigi and he had a girl with him. And Gigi and Bobby dragged the girl up on stage and they were
Mm.
performing what you can imagine on the young lady.
I heard
And
about. I wasn't there, but I heard about that.
and I guess Mr. Ebbs was escorted out of the venue from what.
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me. That was his thing. He was just a wild man. Crazy. But the funny part about it, I mean, when he wasn't fucked up, he was a cool guy. You know, he had a really Marshall stacks and pinball machines and video games and tons of records, and he was a really he was a big collector, so he had a lot of rare videos of like Alice Cooper, um, early stuff, and like Gigi stuff that before it was hot, before you could get it, he had it. And yeah, I think he actually played guitar with Gigi Allen one time too. I think somewhere, I think it was in Philly. He
Hmm.
played guitar with him. Um, yeah, interesting guy. I mean, he eventually just became homeless in New York. He was homeless, and then it just eventually died.
Hmm.
Just the drugs, man. The drugs just doesn't work.
No, no, never does.
Never does.
Um, let me jump to Voice of Doom. Because that was and still is, the EP, you did the original incarnation of Voice of Doom. You're singing, playing guitar. London May plays a couple tracks on drums on that record.
Hmm.
So let's kind of bring it back to the start of Voice of Doom. That would have been what, 86-ish?
86,
Yeah.
86, 86. Yeah. Frankie and I were in the System, my first band, which I said started late 82, 83. And we were in that for a couple of years, but things started to kind of peter out. And like I said, I was playing guitar as well as drumming. And listen, like a lot of drummers probably they want to play guitar, they want to do something else. I tried my hand at it. Um, and I told Frankie one day, I said, if this is done, let's try to do this, because I got some ideas. And we wanted to go in more of a Sabbathy, like a Black Sabbath. I hate to use these things, but Black Sabbath meets Black Flag type of direction. And of course, like everybody else, there was a big Misfits influence. You talk to Kaprowski and Steve and everybody. Everybody was influenced by the Misfits, or at least everybody in my clique was. Um, so yeah, so we started that, and we played around a little bit, but didn't really get much momentum until um, we, on a lark, got London to play on that record. We had a recording session coming up, and Frankie and I had seen Sam Hain at the Ritz, and we didn't have a drummer at the time. So Frankie, I was like, wow, it would be kind of cool to get. We need somebody like London, like that, you know. And or one of us said that, and then the other one was like, well, why don't we just try to get him, And it was like, how are we gonna get him? He's in Sam Hain. He's playing with Glenn Danzig. Like that's it. He's made it, you know. And just I don't remember exactly. My memory's not really that good whether I got his phone number or I called 411 or something, but I got a hold of him, and I was living in Hackensack. He was living in Rutherford at the time.
Mhm.
Cold called him just out of nowhere, introduced myself, blah, 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 this and that. And that was right after they had signed with Ruben after the new music seminar, but they weren't doing anything yet. And he was down, they had nothing going on. And I said, I have a couple of shows coming up and a recording session. Would you be interested? And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. So that's really how it happened. The first time we played CB's, that was the first time London had played CB's, was with Voice of Doom, which was, kind of cool for him. We recorded at Songworks Studio in Emerson, which was owned by Mike Gutilla, who was on the Sam Hain Initium record, played the chimes, that Yamaha keyboard chime thing, so little tie into Sam Hain there, with the studio and with London. So that was kind of fun. And that didn't last very long. London eventually moved back to Baltimore when the Danzig thing fell apart for him. And he went on to play with Dag Nasty after that. And that was it.
Now, did Voice of Doom carry on past that point, or was that?
No, not maybe a little while longer, maybe a year. We had a revolving door of bass players and drummers, but nothing. It wasn't happening anymore. Excuse me, I hate to say it, but such a high watermark was set for drummers at that point that
Right.
it was tough to get to there again. And me being a drummer, I was critical of anybody that came in after London. We had maybe two or three guys came in for a short period of time, but it ended in 88, and then Frankie and I went on to do something else after that. That was it.
Well, 88, 89, 90, around that time
Mm-hmm.
was when I really started getting into the scene. I was still too young to go to shows, I was in grade school back then. But I was reading the East Coast Rocker, and I was going to like the Sound Exchange in Wayne, buying the records, or Flip Side. Definitely the Sound Exchange. I think Flip Side, I started going there a little later. But, I was kind of catching up on who was doing what in Jersey. I remember reading about The Thing, Sal's band, before EF, and another band that was constantly kind of being written about that I would see around in ads in Jersey in those days, Backseat Driver, who I know you had a pretty lengthy stint with as drummer, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Quite a few
yeah,
years with Backseat Driver.
yeah. Um, I joined Driver, and well, before Driver, after VOD fell apart, Frankie and I were playing with a band called Nasty Ammunition, which I went back to drums. We kind of like that was the Genocide Nasty Ammunition period, and then we had a lot of different people in that band. Heim sang for us for a while. Eventually, John Anderson came into play.
Hmm,
Anderson came in to play bass, and also at that time, I was doing a little stint with Mental Decay. Like Oprowski said, everybody's played with Mental Decay.
right.
I played with them for a short period with Anderson and Jack Steeples, which was a lot of fun. I did a little thing with them, and then I joined Driver. I think it was 91. I got into Driver, 90 or 91. And they had been out. Yeah, that's another interesting, like, same kind of thing with when I started playing with Genocide, was that I always found certain bands, like their crew and like immediate group of people, kind of interesting, because not only would I listen to the band, but I also like their crowd was all about. You know, it was interesting seeing other people's crowds. You know, like um, when I would go to New Brunswick, there was the New Brunswick crowd, and they were strangers that I had never met before, but they were like interesting people. Like, why were they? How did they come to this band? Driver was the same way, because Driver was from Clifton, and I remember seeing them at Connections with in the early days, and with the lights and the smoke, and it was like a whole big production, and they could play. Like, those guys they were great players, like Ray and Steve. They were great, and they were a little older than me, and I could tell like they came from that hard rock school, like I did, you know. Um, and they were interesting. Their fans, their crowd was interesting, and their stage show, and I met Dean, and I was a fan of the band before I joined, so that was another case of right place, right time.
Hmm.
Dean was like, we're getting rid of our drummer, for whatever reason. you know he had seen me play. He's like, do you want to join? And I was like, yeah, definitely. Another interesting uh crew to become a part of, and their dynamic, and their shows. And we did play some really good shows, I have to say. I don't know if you remember, but opened for the Ramones 3 times. We played the Limelight once, or they played it once. I saw them at the Limelight, and then a few months later I played there with them. So
Hmm.
that was interesting, and I was with them for quite a number of years.
Yeah, I mean that whole era was kind of my gateway into the whole thing. I
You
didn't
saw Driver? You saw Driver?
I saw Driver, but it was like years afterwards. I can't recall if you were drumming. When did I see them? It was at Connections. It
Of
was
course.
definitely the 90s. It was definitely the late 90s though. Um,
Wasn't me then.
yeah, it
I
was
left in 95.
okay. Yeah, this was after that. Because I started going down to Connections when I was in college. So
Mm.
it would have been around that time. So
Mm.
I think I actually saw them with Dead Planet Baby with Kevin and Miller
Yeah, yeah.
and Riddle. Remember Riddle?
Spook, yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah, great
I
guy.
was probably I was probably there. I was probably there, but not playing. Because I
Yeah,
think I remember that show. I remember that show. Because Dead Planet Babies, that was one of those things that they, once every 10 years they would get together to play,
right.
you know.
This
Still
happened.
hoping for another reunion.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I love Kevin to death. We'll mention him a little later because I know you do some
Oh
recording.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you recorded with him not too long ago, right? Didn't you do something? I remember I was supposed to go there one weekend, and I think I came the weekend after you did.
I record my drum tracks with him because he gets such a great sound down there.
Oh yeah. Oh
You know,
yeah.
I'm up in New Hampshire, but when I do a track for somebody, I always go to Kevin's
Yeah, me too.
down because the guy, I mean, he records the kick really well, and I can listen to Kevin talk forever. I mean, he's such a great storyteller, you know?
Oh man, I tell you, I love Kevin to death, but if you don't rein him in, he'll just keep going, because every time we would go to Kevin's, you know, box of Joe, uh, you know, how he eats bacon on a bagel, you know, take the bacon off the bagel, just eat the bacon, chain smoking, you know, then maybe about 3, 4 o'clock, the whiskey would come out, you know.
That goddamn drum sound is worth it, man. I love going there.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, keep it fast forward the story a little bit.
yeah.
This is when, things kind of intersect with us in a way, at least the start of it. I was a senior in high school, and a couple nights a week, I just got my driver's license. I would drive up to Maple Grange Road in Vernon and jam with Moe and Doyle from the
Mm,
Misfits.
mm.
Um, and there were kind of, a lot of people were kind of floating in and out of that machine shop at the time. Um, I know you'd jam with them a couple times around that era as well,
Once, 94,
94. That
94.
was on
Yeah,
guitar,
well, me and Heim went up and with Bill Gill,
right?
and we because Billy's brother Steve was friends with somebody who was friends with them,
Mhm.
and that's when they were holding their open auditions for, you know,
Right,
singer and drummer, even though they already had Shud and Graves was kind of waiting in the wings.
right, right.
um I think they were doing that just to kind of get people like excited, like, oh, we're gonna try out for the Misfits and stuff like that. But we went up there, and yeah, we on a Saturday, and we played. um we did a whole shit ton of, it was like, me on the drums, Doyle, Jerry, Himes looking at me with the microphone, and Jerry's like, what song do you want to do? And I looked over at the set list. I'm like, let's just do them all.
Mhm.
He's like, okay, fucking amps on, and you know Halloween into 20 Eyes, and we probably did about 10 songs, just one right after another. And then Doyle went back to work because they were working, and Chud came and he played drums, and I played Doyle's Iceman,
Mhm.
you know, and Heim sang a little more, and Billy sang a little bit, and it was just like a whole big thing. We didn't think that we were going to be in the Misfits, although that was our, like, it was like, it was very surreal to be there like that. I mean, a lot of people have similar stories about it. A lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people were, it was a lot of fun. It was an experience to do it. Um, and that was really it. That then after that, shortly after that is when I joined Frankenstein. Not too long after that,
Right.
and then, but
I was gonna say it kind of all ties in because I make friends with Mo, you know, and again I was like 17 playing that massive friggin' drum set that Chud had at the time, which I think
yeah,
used to be Robo's old kit. And he's
I think
like,
there was a bass drum as one of the floor toms, wasn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah,
All the
yeah,
way, yeah.
yeah, it was fucking ridiculous. It
It
was
was with the
I,
spikes everywhere. It was
I
nuts.
still have like vivid memories of that friggin' drum set because I'm like 17 at the time, and I'm like, this fucking thing's like, it just. But
Oh,
Mo's like,
so you remember when they hit the power strip and all, and the amps would come on? What thunder that sounded like!
oh yeah, yeah,
Oh, it was mind blowing.
and Mo's fucking deaf, so he's like, how you doing?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
entire
yeah.
time, and so he was like, listen, we need someone to record the vocal auditions, and Chud's going to be doing that. So we need someone to keep the beat regularly. And I was down the road at school, so I would just drive up there after school and do that.
Nice. That's
And
cool.
that machine shop ended up being kind of like a meeting ground for who was doing shit at the time. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Al B was around.
Yep.
You know, people I'm still friends with to this day. I met at Moe's.
Hmm.
But one day I'm jamming. It was on a Saturday and Doyle was there, begrudgingly, of course.
Hmm.
Sal B, you know, all the usual suspects. And I'm playing Astro Zombies or whatever. And I'm looking dead ahead, and there's a guy staring at me with this big grin on his face, you know, just I guess digging what he was hearing. That was Dan Canzaneri, and that's the first thing.
Oh, wow.
And he
That's
was telling
funny.
me, you know, I play in a band called Electric Frankenstein. I think Renee was still playing drums for them at the time.
Yeah.
Renee,
I replaced Renee.
right. So I met Dan. I don't think I met Sal that day, but they did some like thing at the Rockaway Mall, like a signing, the Misfits, a couple months later. Sal and Dan turn up with Howie Pyro.
Hmm.
And that's how I meet Howie. And Howie's like up
Hmm.
against the wall in the mall smoking. He looked like the coolest guy ever. I'm like 17. I'm like, I want to be like Howie Pyro.
That
And
was
now
probably
I'm
a
a,
culture shock for him
yeah,
to
now
be
I
in a
still
mall.
can't stop smoking. You know, I blame Howie. No, I'm only kidding.
Mm.
But so that's when I met the EF guys. And shortly thereafter is when you joined the band. I think it was the Time Is Now EP was your first record with them,
Uh,
right?
yes and no. Time Is Now came out first, but I recorded Conquers the World before
Okay.
that. Yeah, that was Conquers the World. I think we recorded. I joined the band in like March or April, you know, through Steve Miller. He just called me up one day and he's like, and I didn't even know he was singing in a band. I always knew Steve as a guitar player. And he's like, yeah, I'm singing with this band. You know, we need a drummer. We're going to record and blah. You know, the way Steve is, he just spits out a whole ton of information at once, rapid fire to you. And I had heard of Electric Frankenstein prior to that
Hmm.
because, you know, I heard it was, I saw them in the Aquarian or East Coast Rock or whatever, their records. And, so, and I knew, Jim Foster from AOD's new band, and Jim and I were in a band in the late '80s for like 5 minutes too, also. So I hadn't seen him since then, but I think I was in the band for maybe like a month or two, and then we went in and did Conquers the World
Hmm.
first, and then by the end of the summer, we did Time Is Now, and
Hmm.
but Time Is Now came out first.
Okay, that's
So
what it was. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
yeah, and that was fun. Again, once again, new people, different crowd, uh, different dynamic of people, how they worked, what they were like, what their fans were like, their friends, you know, all this aesthetic stuff that I like to absorb in with who I'm playing with. You know, my first show with them was at CB's, opening up for the voluptuous horror of Karen Black,
right.
and Sal said, he's like, you know, we have a lot of Asian fans for whatever reason, you know, because of Frankenstein, I guess. And there was like this bunch of Asian kids there, like anime type people before anime, you know. Um, and it was a good show. You know, Frankenstein was starting to gain some momentum at that point, even with just the two singles out. You know, the EF theme one and what was the second one? Sweet Sickness, or the
Yeah,
four
Sweet
songs.
Six. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So they were starting to gain some momentum. So I was like, oh, this is pretty good. You know, this is like and I love the music. You know, I love the aesthetic of, you know, the Les Pauls with the Marshalls, you know, Dan playing the Iceman bass, you know, like all that stuff was like checked a lot of boxes for me of what I like in a band, you know,
Mhm.
and nobody sounded like that at that time. You know, people were um there was no other bands around that I thought sounded like that, you
Right.
know, and that's what attracted me to it. And you know, of course, Steve's voice was just sealed the whole thing. I
Yeah.
didn't even know he could sing like that, you know. but yeah, that was kind of a magical time for, all the pieces kind of falling into place with all five of us, and it was cool. It was a good little run there at the beginning, and then of course things changed and came back together again. You know the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say that lineup with you, Miller, Jim, and the brothers. Um,
That's the classic lineup.
yeah, absolutely, no question, no question at all. I mean, I really, really like the Scotty era because I like
Hmm.
Scott's voice a lot. And I mean, Miller's one of my favorite singers, hands down. I mean, the guy
Same,
and
same.
fucking talented. That guy can come up with a song in seconds. I've seen him do
Yeah.
it. I mean,
Yep.
brilliant songwriter. Scotty was a different thing, but it was cool. And I know, Steve, look, we've all kind of come in and out of that band a few times, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but I know Steve departed for a bit. You guys got Scott, you did the Six Songs album. And that's when EF kind of mushroom clouded for a while there. 'Cause I know
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of stuff in California, you know,
Yeah.
big shows, big exposure. Like 97, 98, I think was really when things kind of catapulted with EF. Or
Earlier, 96, 97.
96,
I'd say.
97.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 96 was the first time we went um to California
Mhm.
to tour. Um that was our first tour, was 96. Summer of 96 we went to California for the first time. Um and we played with the Ads, the Adolescents, the
Right,
Ads,
totally.
ADZ. Yeah. Um and that was the beginning of that. And then 97 we recorded 6 songs.
Mhm.
And then 97 was the first time we went to Europe. We went to Sweden to play a big festival with Turbo Negro and I don't know if it was Backyard Babies or Helicopters. I don't remember. Lucifer, all those big bands. And yeah, that's when things took off. And then 98 we came back and we started touring again. Our first tour of California was we opened. It was like us and the Ads. And I think the next time we went, either 97 or 98, um, we did it again. And then we actually headlined in, it was Gilman Street, over Poison Idea,
Mm.
which I thought was really, that's a jump right there. And then we started headlining our own, you know, we went to California a bunch of times, and the Midwest and stuff like that. We did a bunch of shows all around. Um, but yeah, that was like you say, the Mushroom Cloud. That's when things picked up. During the Scotty years.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, shortly thereafter, you take your first break from EF. And there's another band in this era. Where does Holshot kind of fit into the chronology there?
Holshot was early '90s.
Oh, really? That
Um,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Holshot was a few years, but it was early '90s. I'm surprised we left that out in the timeline. Um, that was me and Haim and Jason Pavia. I don't know if you remember Jason,
Yeah,
like
sure.
bass, yeah, and a couple other guys. And Bill Gill actually sang for Holshot for a record. Um, that lasted maybe 2 or 3 years. You know, Hardcore band, and again, nobody sounded like that at that point because nobody was doing the old school double time thrash thing. Everything was like that new school, like da 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 da. Nobody was doing that at the time, and people would look at us like they didn't know what to, and we didn't look like a punk band at all, or at least what people perceived as a punk band. You know, we were kind of like the Black Flag of the time. You know, we had long hair and beards. A couple of us had beards, and we didn't have the look of what a lot of those kids did, and they would look at us like, "Wow, these guys are old." Meanwhile, we were the same age as them, but we just looked old because we had beards and
Mm.
nobody had long hair. You know, uh, that was a fun time. You know, we again, the whole shot stuff, very proud of that. I think that was a great little time period. And then that was kind of like at the same time as Driver, you know, that kind of like rode a parallel to the Driver days. And Holshot also did a bunch of recordings, played a couple of good shows. The biggest one was probably at City Gardens with the Bouncing Souls.
Mhm.
You know, remember we played with Drop Dead, Dead Guy, a lot of those. You know, but that's up. Then again, that whatever you wanted to call it, that metalcore or
Right.
crossover stuff had started to come, and but we didn't keep it up. You know, Jason broke the band up, and that was it. You know, as quickly as it started is probably pretty much as quickly as it stopped. You
Yeah.
know, and then that was it. There was never any whole shot reunion or anything.
Yeah, it's a bummer because I've got that compilation CD with the lizard or was it Godzilla or something on the covers, like this day
Oh,
glow.
that crazy Japanese art thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you have that CD. So that's got the original whole shot demo on it, which was recorded by Josh Silverman of all people. You know,
Yeah.
that's first time I had met him. Great tie-in. Um,
Small world,
so
man.
yeah, he was friends with Jason, so that's how I met him. And from Shirk Circus.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's the complete whole shot discography. Our singles, our everything on it. That's the production is horrible. I don't know what happened to it when it went to disc, but it's very like drums and vocals heavy.
Hmm.
You ever Do you agree with that
Yeah,
sound
the
of it?
guitars are a little light on it, but I love the
Yeah.
drumming on it because it's like right there.
Oh,
But
well, thank
I
you.
hear what you're saying. Yeah. But
it
it's
could use
funny.
it could use a remix or a remaster or something.
Yeah. You just mentioned Dead Guy. To make the world even smaller, Dead Guy, those guys were hanging out at the Pro Edge, the
Oh,
Misfits.
really?
Yeah, that's how I met Dave from Dead Guy.
Okay.
His first or second record had come out and he was like giving people t-shirts and the CD and shit. And now they became like this whole thing, and
Oh, yeah. Heim loved them. Heim and Jason were big Dead Guy fans.
yeah, they were good. I mean, I can't listen to that every day, but if the mood strikes me, I'll definitely dive into that discography.
Hmm.
But you mentioned Silverman, which is another era. And there's, it's great talking to you, man, because I feel like I'm back there, like there's so many people who unfortunately aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Um, one person who was absolutely critical that period of time in Jersey was Anthony Trance.
Hmm.
Um, Promoter at the Pipeline, I think he booked the Connections as well
He
back
did.
then.
He did.
And he was in Sacred Denial back in the 80s,
Hmm.
or
Yep.
back in Jersey. But you, Trance, Silverman, rest in peace, and Anderson from Mental Decay had a band called Johnny and the Has-Beens. Um, in my opinion, one of the best sounding records from Jersey. The production on that is amazing. The album Deadpool you guys did. Um,
Hmm.
you guys did that at Mixolydian, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, you know, I don't know how much you know about the origins of that, but um, Johnny and the Has-Beens was never meant to be like a real band. It was just Trance and Silverman and Anderson, their songs from their previous bands.
Right.
So I knew all the. I mean, I wasn't a big Sacred Denial fan. I didn't really listen to them. I knew who they were and I'd seen them, but I didn't listen to them really a lot. But were you around when Lucy's Trance started, or you
Yeah,
weren't? You weren't around. You were
I
okay.
was. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Driver played with them, and they were great. I love them. You
Mhm.
know, um, and that's when I started to you know know who Anthony was, and he wasn't really when that band fell apart. He was really like lost. He really was. That was like his. that was going to be his future as far as he was concerned, because it did have a little bit like I think it was like a subsidiary of Atlantic or something. They had a minor like
Yeah.
label behind them, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and they were a good band. They had great songs, and Anderson with Earth Pig, and Josh, of course, with Shirk Circus. I had seen all these bands and I knew their songs. So when they said, we want to do this record, they asked me, and I was like, yeah. I mean, I think we rehearsed maybe 2 or 3 times, and that was it. We went to Mixolydian, and Anthony and Josh paid for it, and yeah, we banged out. Well, I banged out all my parts. I did the drums all in one day,
Really
just
cool.
one swoop. Yeah, yeah. And believe it or not, actually, a lot of the guitar tracks Josh did live and kept them because they were so great. Again, the approach to recording. One of the reasons I love Josh, and I would go on to play with Josh again in the Dark Brothers many
Yeah.
years later, but Josh was had that great melody maker, and plugged into his amp, turned it up, and he just went, and it was all here and here. He was great. um we did a couple of their songs and trance songs and Earth Pig songs, um but we never played live. That band never played live. We took pictures of Connections up on the stage for the inside of the CD to make it look like a live show, but we never did a show,
Hmm.
which I was kind of disappointed at, because I enjoyed that. Their songs were great and they were no brainers. And I didn't know how the I was only there for the recording. That one day they spent the weekend up there, like a 3-day weekend, and did the whole thing. And then when I heard it, I was like, wow, this sounds really good. Like, not like the punk stuff I was doing at the time. It sounded like a professional record, like something you'd hear on the radio, you know. I was like, this is really good. And Trance was, he was hot at that point. He's like, he was booking the Pipeline, and that was, I don't know if it was Pipeline or Connections. It was somewhere in that era, but he's like, yeah, I'm talking to this guy and I'm talking to that guy, and I'm gonna get a music lawyer and all this stuff, and this might go somewhere. And I was like, oh, all right, well then that'd be great, But then, like everything else, it just didn't. It just died, and that was it. And then I think maybe like I think Trance died in 98 or 99.
I think it was 98, I think.
98.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was maybe like a year after that he died.
Yeah. Yeah. Last time I saw him was at Connections, and I played the Pipeline a ton of times. He would book the band I was in at the time, and but we never like actually talked, because it was always like you're working, he's doing his shit and we're playing
Yeah.
and all that. But I was at Connections one night and it was like a quiet night. I can't remember who was playing. I think the Subterraneans were playing, someone like that. And it was like kind of a chill night. And he's at the bar, and I just walked over to him and started talking to him. And we had the coolest conversation. He was in really good spirits, and we were just bullshitting. I was that was when I was my first time with EF. I was recording
Mm.
some stuff with EF. And he's like, "Oh, that's so cool." And Dan and I were talking about doing a project, so I told him about that, and he was really excited. And he died like not too long after that. It was
Mm.
weeks, maybe.
The
You know,
drugs, man. The drugs. It's freaking bad. Josh too.
yeah.
Josh too, man. I mean,
I mean,
thankfully Anderson's still with us.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, Anderson's
I haven't
great.
seen him. I haven't seen him in I don't know how long, forever.
Yeah,
Um, but I would see Wendy every once in a while at Chiller Theater. Um, but I haven't seen Johnny in a long time. And Johnny and Frankie Fender, uh, they were buds for a long time, back in the day. And I don't know if they still keep in contact. But Johnny, another one, just incredibly talented guy, great voice. You know, Playing in Mental Decay with him was a lot of fun. He was great in that band.
yeah.
That was a good Mental Decay lineup. Getting back to them with Steeples and their other guitar player, I think his name was Larry. Excuse me. He was kind of like a low key kind of guy, but that was Anderson was great. You know, um, like I said, I haven't seen him or talked to him in a long time, but hopefully he's well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Silverman, I still listen to those Shirk Circus records, and I still listen to the Johnny and the Has-Beens record. I mean, this guy, and plus tax too.
Oh yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
what what a talented guy. And
With Bob Skorupski, right? Bob.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, Fine Line, beautiful song. I mean, the guy and the Dark Brothers stuff. When I saw Kevin over at Homebrew a couple months back, I paid him a visit, and I'm like, I love that Dark Brothers record with Death Will Carry Her Away,
Mm.
which is beautiful and heartbreaking and extraordinary. And I'm like, you got a recording of that anywhere? He's like, yeah, I think I got the CD, and he gave me the album, and just what a talent, what an
That was
absolute
Karma Kills. That was our first one.
great album.
Yeah.
Great album, man. And the thing about Josh, my experiences with him are limited, but they were memorable.
Mm.
Thursday night, the Pipeline. You remember
Yeah.
the playground in the back of the Pipeline, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So everybody was kind of getting fucked up back then, So Josh and I were bonding one night, and before I knew it, I had joined Plus Tax somehow. Like we were
Oh,
talking.
really?
Well, so I thought, because we were like, we're gonna be in a band and we're gonna do this, and we're buds now and the whole thing.
Ah, okay.
So the following week, I go back to the Pipeline, or maybe like 2 weeks later, Josh is there. I'm like, hey man, how's it going? He's like, hi, my name's Josh.
Oh,
I'm like, oh no.
that's it. Done. Over.
My dreams of playing with Josh were destroyed.
That's the funny thing about Josh is, like I said, the first time I met him was Holshot was playing Montclair State University
Mhm.
in one of the campus, I don't know, something. Or yeah. And we needed a PA. And Josh lived in Nutley. And me and Jason went there to pick up the PA. So we just first time I met Josh, he opens up the door and he's got on the red flannel and the holes in the jeans, you know. That was like, and it was the summertime, and I was like, this guy's a little over. I think he had the jacket on too, like the army jacket or whatever he wore. Like, this guy's a little overdressed for the summer, isn't he? And Jason was just like, oh, he's a little eccentric. He's a great guy, but he's a little eccentric. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we got the PA and blah blah blah. And then, not too long after that, we recorded our first demo at, I don't know if it was Montclair State University. I think it was one of those colleges. No, it was William Patterson College.
Hmm.
It was WPSU, or I don't remember. And Josh engineered it, and he was wearing the same clothes that he wore the first time I met him. He had the jacket on with the flannel. It was like, wow, this guy's a character. Who would do that? Like, and I met him again, and it was like, we played with Holshot played shows with Shirk Circus, which is really like a horrible mix. You think about it, the two bands were polar opposites, but yet
Right.
we played together. But I loved Josh. I thought his songwriting was amazing. So many, just he could tear your heart out with
Yeah,
his
oh yeah.
lyrics, and
And he has. Yeah.
effortlessly with his playing. Most of the time he didn't even have a pick. He would just play with his fingers, and he was just, he would just come in and just be brilliant, out of nowhere. And it was great. And I remembered that, um, after I think it was right after I had left, I was out of Frankenstein again. I think it was like 2004 or five. I had just had enough and I bailed. And I contacted Josh and I said, I'm free. Let's do something. And he was kind of getting his life back together. He had a drug problem and all that stuff. And, he was just about ready to get back and start playing again. So, I hooked up with him and Joe Puggle, that's the first time I met Joe. And a friend of his, this guy named Jeff, who's also passed away since, on bass, and that's how the Dark Brothers came about. But again, it was another one of those things where it was like we were playing Shirk Circus material at first, you know, which I really enjoyed because I got to put my spin on those Shirk Circus songs, you know, and made them heavier, and that was a lot of fun. And then we recorded at Kevin's at his old studio. That record was actually just gonna be a demo.
Hmm.
You know, we were just gonna go in and record a couple of songs, and we just ended up keeping it and finishing, you know. And then the second record we recorded at Mixolydian, because that's where Josh loved Mixolydian, you know, and that's when then we recorded our second record there. I don't know if are you familiar with that one?
The second one, I don't think I've heard it actually, to be honest.
The 7 Steps to Enlightenment.
No, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah,
I'd love to.
you gotta look for that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was like the first Dark Brothers record was, you know, like retreads of Josh's and Joe's old songs and a little bit of original stuff. But then the second record, which is only, I think it only has 6 songs on it, that was like all stuff that we wrote as the Dark Brothers,
Mm.
you know. And yeah, that was a, you know, but then again, you know, Josh, he started strong and ended badly. You know,
Yeah.
it didn't end well for him. You know, we got kind of, you know, me and Joe kind of got a little like, you know, we love you, but you know, we want to do something else. Like it's just wasn't happening anymore, you know. And then Josh actually put Shirk back together with a couple of different people, you know, and he wasn't even singing at the end of Shirk.
Hmm.
You remember that? If you look at those, there was videos from Maxwell's where somebody else was singing. He wasn't even, you know, he was singing a little bit, but there was somebody else that was singing.
Wow.
And then Joe and I went off and did the 65s after that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bummer, man. I mean, that Death Will Carry Her Away track. I mean, I know that's written about his dog. Kevin told me that.
Cat, his
Cat,
cat.
cat, excuse me. But I was recording some tracks. I think I laid down like 18 drum tracks one day at Kevin's. And at the time, I was very close with a young lady who was dealing with a very intense drug addiction. And she's better now, thank God.
That's
But at
good.
that time, I was kind of like when I went to Jersey, I was kind of rendezvousing, and it was fucking with my head. So Kevin and I are going off on these tangents as one does at Kevin's. And I'm just kind of like I'm falling apart. And we get onto the topic of Josh. And he's like, "Oh, let me play you this song," and he
Oh,
plays.
dude, did you ever hear this song? Let me play this
Yeah.
for you.
So he puts that fucking song on, and my head is like melting, my heart split in half. I'm like, this song is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard because of where my head was at the time. Josh had that ability, like he had something, and it's a fucking shame that we love him in Jersey, right? But
Mhm.
the world needed to hear that guy. And I know he had a moment. I think there were some videos with Shirk when he was on Bar None. But
Mhm.
maybe someday, like somebody will invest some cash and put out like a Josh box set, or something, and just like get that stuff out for real. I mean, great songwriter.
Did you like which Cirque album did you like the best? Words to Say or March?
I'm partial to Words to Say because that was the first one I heard. You know what I mean?
Yeah, same,
Yeah.
same. Yeah, the third one came out. I don't even know if it was an official release or if somebody just put it out. Um, this band will ruin your life or something, or this band will destroy your life.
I don't think I know that one.
Yeah, that one's out there. I think it was like a bunch of stuff that they had recorded and didn't come out. But also interesting is that Dan Smith was in the 65s
Hmm.
after the Dark Brothers. Started off on bass, and he went to second guitar. So we kind of had that, that Josh connection. 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon, everybody. You know,
Right.
we're all in this little incestual punk rock pool. You know,
Yes.
as I'm sure you've heard before. Um, you mentioned something about the Kung Fu Killers
Yeah, yeah.
earlier.
Hmm. Yep.
You played in Kung Fu Killers too?
Fuck yeah, I did.
Oh, I didn't. Did you play out with them?
Yep. Yeah.
I think I played out with them. We played at Clash Bar once,
Hmm.
and that was it. That was the only time I ever played out with them. Did I record with them? I don't even remember.
I think why I didn't
Oh, I
play.
did. I
Yeah,
did. Yes,
you're
I
on the
did.
album. Yeah, that's
Yes.
not me.
Okay. I did. I'm sorry. I couldn't remember.
Well, let's get into that. In the 90s, I'm going to school at Montclair. Kevin had the original studio, I think, at his apartment back in the day in Wayne.
In his bedroom.
In his bedroom, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The electric
Mont,
drums.
Mont, Montville.
Okay. No, was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Montville.
somewhere, but I remember he had an electric drum kit. Remember that when he had
Yes.
the electric drum set?
I was never there. I didn't record there with him. I only heard about it.
And so I'm going to school at Montclair, and Dan calls me and he's like, "We're going to be recording at our friend Kevin's. Do you want to come along and do something?" I'm like, "Yeah, sounds great, of course, you know." So it was Sal, Dan, and Miller, and we wrote and recorded 2 songs over 2 nights. Looks like, did we freeze? Oh,
For a
here we go.
second, we did.
No, no worries. So we recorded 2 songs over 2 nights, like out of nowhere. Steve was just like vamping lyrics and a guitar line, and then boom, we have an instant song.
Hmm.
And that ended up as Electric Frankenstein 2000.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Been that for a while.
Yeah.
So that's the story with that. And then years later, like 10 years later, I run into Sal at Chiller Theater. And he's like, "I was gonna call you. I have this thing I'm doing with
I was gonna call you.
yeah, hey man, yeah." So
Sal's got that thing. You don't see him for 20 years, and then as soon as you run into him, he makes you feel like you just talked to him a week ago.
yeah, I love Sal. I mean, one of the most interesting, colorful people I've ever known. I mean, he's just fantastic. So I was like, "Yeah, I was going to call you. I got this thing called Kung Fu Killers with Anthony, the the
His
the,
brother.
the young Canzoneri,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and Dan, and they're like, do you want to do this Kung Fu Killers thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." And then that morphed into they had Rob on drums for EF, and Kung Fu Killer starts playing shows, and then EF had a Canadian run, and Rob couldn't do it for some reason. So I was already playing with Sal, so it's like, "Well, why don't you do the EF thing too?" So that's how I ended up doing that. But this is where it gets sticky. You record the Kung Fu Killers record, right?
Mhm.
I got to learn that material, and I've got to learn your material with EF.
You were like that fucking John Steele is. I
I
just can't get away from him.
well, no. I said earlier I love your drumming style, but I quickly fucking hated it because it's so good. And I've done a lot with drumming. I've been playing over 30 years. The greatest challenge I've ever had as a drummer was playing your stuff.
Wow! Stop it!
No,
Stop it! Go
I
easy
will
with the
put,
grease gun, Joel.
no, no, listen. I would sit there and listen to it and go, "What the fuck is this fucking guy doing?" And honestly, I'll freely admit, people are going to be watching this. I had to cheat beat my way through Kung Fu Killers. And
Uh,
cheat beat my way through like some of the EF stuff. Action High, I still want to sit down with you and figure out how to properly.
Nobody can play that drum intro but me. I'm sorry. I don't toot my own horn
You're right.
ever. But Sal actually called me up one day and said, "You got to come down to Kevin's in Belleville when they were rehearsing." He's like, "That I can't remember that guy that was playing drums with them for a while. The guy from New York, not Rob.
Joe
I don't remember
Martin.
his name. No, it wasn't Joe Martin. It was I can't remember his name. I think he died. He went to Europe with them at the end. Anyway, he's like, he can't play your intro. He's like, "Can you please come down here and show him how to do it?" I'm like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, he's driving us all crazy. We can't get it." And I was like, "All right." And I went down there and I showed him, And I'm like, it's just this, and he couldn't get it. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. Like, do your own thing then. But they didn't want that. They wanted my intro. And I
Yeah.
was like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't, I didn't think it was something that big, but apparently nobody could do it but me. And I don't understand why. But listen, you can thank the drumming gods for that, I guess. I was blessed with some individuality.
I mean, I got it to kind of sound like it, but hand on heart, I don't know how the fuck you did it. I really don't. And I've studied that song 100 times and I still can't figure it out. And that's the truth. That's the honest truth. And even with Kung Fu Killers, I'm like, I was telling Sal, I'm like, this shit's really hard. He's like, well, what do you mean? It's fast punk rock. I'm like, it's fucking John Steele playing fast punk rock. There's a difference.
God.
There's a fucking difference here.
Oh,
I mean, I know I don't mean to blow you, but I mean the truth is, man, I gotta pay my respects.
I appreciate that. That's extremely nice of you.
You
And
made me a
and
better
listen,
you made me a better drummer. You know, I did the pig face thing, playing the House of Blues and all that. I would not have been at that level had I not learned your beats in EF. And that's the
wow, that's awfully sweet of you, and I appreciate that. Thank you. It means a lot to me. It really does. I thank you.
and maybe there'll be a third band I've got to follow you and eventually out to be.
Kung Fu Killers was like, I got to be honest, I don't remember. I know it was Sal, me, Dan, Anthony, and I
Mhm.
don't remember who else was in the band. There was I don't remember. Sal and Dan played guitar. I don't remember who played bass.
Oh,
I
what's
re-
his name? He's a friend of Dan's.
oh, Lenny,
Lenny.
Lenny, that's right,
Right,
that's
right.
right. Yeah, and we did that record, which I don't think I've heard since then, since we recorded it. And then that at that time period, that also led me back into doing a little bit more EF recording.
Hmm.
I did some one-offs at that period too. That was in between like Rob Sefcik and Rob from downstairs at Kevin's and you and all these different people. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, we got, I got a call from somebody. He wants 5 songs. We're gonna, So all right, I'll see you Kevin's Thursday or whatever. You go down there and boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
And 2 weeks later, we're pressing record. That's kind of how that went. And I did some shows with them here and there in that time period. I never went back out on the road with them. Um, they
Did you
asked me, good.
did you play that thing they did when Jim Foster came back for a while?
No, I played with Foster. We did an original EF reunion show at Clash Bar.
Okay.
Original, me, Jim, Sal, Dan, and Steve. We did one show at Clash Bar. Um, I don't remember what year it was. Maybe 2014, something like that. Maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That was, and then Foster kind of came back later, but no, they did that How to Make a Monster reunion thing,
Right.
with Rob and Jim. But no, I didn't. I never played with Jim and EF after that, except for a couple of years ago. Dan had moved to South Carolina or North Carolina, wherever they live now.
Yeah, North Carolina.
Dan moved there first, and Sal was getting ready to move down there, but he wanted to do some songs with the lineup, and we rehearsed a bunch of times, came up with a bunch of songs. It was going to be like an EF trilogy. It was going to be like 2 songs with Steve, 2 songs with Scott, 2 songs with Larry from the Candy Snatchers or Tony from the Ads, you know. But then that never materialized. And then, Sal eventually moved and that was it,
Yeah.
you know. So that was it. I've
Yeah.
never been able to, I've never been able to really escape EF. Not that I really wanted to, but it's always there in my, it's always there. It's always just kind of off to the side, like waiting to, you know, somebody ask me about it or they saw me somewhere or something like that, you know.
Well, let me ask you. I don't know if Miller did this with you. Perhaps he did. When I did the Canadian shows with them, you know, like when you end a song like bum 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 bum, you know,
The
or what?
count of how many times you're going to crash at the end?
Yeah, he did that with you.
No,
Because
no.
he'd
I
come up to
maybe
me,
maybe once or twice, but not regularly.
he'd be like 11, 14. And then the last time he's like 17. I'm like, are you I fucked it up and we were laughing, you know.
Steve, you know that it's funny. Like when I came back to EF in 2001, um, I missed playing with Steve because Steve, you know, I had seen Frankenstein in the period that I was out when Steve came back. Scotty and I left. Scotty moved back to California. I left. Scotty and I were both living in New York during those early EF days. I moved back to Jersey. Scotty moved to California, and then I didn't see them for a while. And then I saw them with Carl and
Rob.
Rob, you know, and Steve really like became like a great front man at that point. Like he found himself as a front man, you know. He wasn't really into being a front man back in the early days. I don't know if you knew this, if he ever mentioned it to you, but he was doing that like Crash Street Kids band at the same time
Oh
back in
yeah.
the early, you know, and he was playing guitar and Buddy Verne was playing with him and Spike was on drums and they had that singer guy. And but that was really where he was a guitar player. He could sing and he was a great singer, but he hadn't found himself as a front man until later. You know, he kind of developed into like a real good like personality and he really like had it. Like now he was a singer, you know, he was a front man. And I was like, wow, they sound really good, you know, like and I love Scotty and I love that period, but I always prefer the Steve vocals. And don't forget we had Rick sing a record,
That's
you
right.
know,
Yes.
which was interesting, you know. But Steve is the voice of VF as far as I'm concerned. No disrespect to any of the other guys, including their current singer, but um, so when you know Sal asked me to come back, I was like, I'm in. You know what I mean? I'm in because I was out of it enough for a while, and now Steve was playing guitar. We were 4-piece, and then we just started doing a lot. We started touring and just a lot of stuff. In probably about 4 or 5 years, we did Europe and California and all over the country and Canada. You know, we did a lot in a couple of years, and those were good days. You know, traveling with Steve was a hoot. You know, I'm sure you know that.
Oh yeah, totally. Totally. The conversations in the van between Sal and Steve, who couldn't be more
Oh,
different. I mean,
oh, forget about it.
holy shit. But I'll say this about Steve. You know, I had rarely done like serious band shows until EF. I'll be honest. Like, you know, a band that had to like have its shit together and had an audience and was playing Canada, you know, and all those things. Steve taught me a lot. Like little things, like before you play officially, don't fuck around behind your drum set. You know, I'm in the club the first night and I'm like, "Doo, doo, doo." He's like, Joel, don't do that. You're
Mhm,
not playing yet. Like you do that shit when you start the first song.
mhm.
Like, good tip. Steve's a crazy rock and roll guy, right? Don't put a cigarette butt on the ground next to him. He'll make you pick it up. You know what
I
I
didn't
mean?
know
Like,
that.
yeah, you know what I mean? Like he's one of those guys. Like he's sharp. I always found him to be really sharp and very professional when it came time to do the shit, you know?
Mhm.
And it's just like those little things, like, yeah, don't fuck around behind the kit before you
Yeah.
starts. Like
Well,
little things like
you
that.
know what used to drive what used to drive him nuts was Sal would always come out on stage first. I was always the last one on stage for whatever reason, whether I had to pee or get a water or whatever. I was always the last one on stage. Sal was always the first one on stage, and he'd be bah, 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 you know, and that used to drive Steve nuts. You know, he's like, "Shut up!" the way he gets, Sal, shut up, and I used to fucking drive him nuts. And we done, and Demolition Joyride was always the last song, as I'm sure you know. Walk off. Okay, we knew we were going to do an encore, one or two songs or whatever, and Sal would stay up there. Sal wouldn't take his guitar off and leave, and that used to drive Steve crazy. That used to piss him off. Like, Sal, the show's over. Get off. You know how he is. But Steve was also very sharp, like you said, sharp with certain things. One thing he taught me, I don't know if you knew this or if you did it or saw him do it or whatever. He'd say, listen, don't bring a lot of shit with you. Don't bring shit that you're going to have to take home. We'd go to Passaic, buy 3 packs of plain black t-shirts, and just bags of like cheap underwear and socks, and bring them on the road with us. Put a black t-shirt on. At the end of the night, just throw it away. When you get back to your, wherever we're staying, just throw your socks and underwear away. Put your fresh pair on tomorrow. Don't bring excess laundry with you. You don't need to do that, because on the road, you'd always get free shit anyway. There was always somebody giving you t-shirts. You were never going to be without a shirt, even if you just wore it for one day and tossed it or left it at somebody's house or took a shower with it or whatever. There's always stuff around. Another good tip Steve turned me on to: in Europe, get there. Europe was great for this. They'd cook for the bands. They'd have food laid out, fruit, chips, whatever, candy bars, bottled water, soda, whatever, whatever. Take some, put it in your bag, because you're going to be hungry later.
Right.
And there's no 7-Elevens around here. So you're going to be hungry later. Grab it now and give yourself a snack, which was great advice. And that's from experience, from touring, and that's how you pick that stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that experience. It was short, it was a couple gigs, you know. But man, it was great doing that, and I agree with you. I mean, I love Scott, and Rick we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But Steve, that's the EF sound, and again, best of luck to the new guy they've got. They got that new lineup, and that new record's really great too. But I grew
I
up
haven't
on
heard it yet.
I grew into the band with Steve as the front man.
Mm-hmm.
You can't beat that rasp, and that fucking attitude he brings to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you knew, or maybe Kevin had played some stuff. I guess it's probably going on like 3 years now since we started. Steve did a lot of work on my house, right? During COVID. And, he converted a basement, he finished my basement and bathroom and a whole bunch of stuff, painting. He was working in my house for like 6 months, and then he said, he goes, I want to record some stuff, so we started going to Kevin's, maybe once or twice a month for a while, were you aware of that?
Yeah, I had heard that. I ran into Steve at Kevin's actually a couple months back, and he was telling me there's some stuff going on, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
but we never finished. It's not, as a matter of fact, he texted me this week. He's like, we got to get to Kevin's. I'm like, I'm waiting on you. He would text me like every, he finished working on my house and he'd moved on to other stuff. And, he would text me like, Kevin's Saturday. And I'm like, okay, no clue, no nothing. Drive up there, he'd show me something. We rehearse it a couple of times, and boom, record it. Just drums and his scratch guitar track. I think we have like 12 or 13 basic tracks recorded,
Right.
but he's never finished it. I think he put guitars on 1 or 2, no vocals, no nothing, but he just I stopped asking him after a while. I'm like, when are we going to finish? And he just he just never got back to me. But now this week he texted me, said he wants to get up there and finish it. So I'm like, whenever you're ready, man, I'll go with you. Even if I don't do anything, I'm, just to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, songwriting machine when he's in the zone. I mean, I've never seen a guy come up with a song faster, and not just a bullshit song, but a song, like that's got something. I mean, he was coming when we were recording at Kevin's way back when, he was just coming up with ideas. He'd be like, "Bah, bah, 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 bah," and he'd like scat some lyrics. He'd be like, "That sounds good, Dan, write that down. That's a good line." And the song was done before I even blinked. The song was written.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he's a talented guy. I mean, you can't take that away from him. He comes from that. He's very him and Kevin definitely have that Aerosmith thing. Huge Aerosmith guy, but also a big punk guy.
Yeah.
With the Dead Boys and stuff like that, and Steve Jones especially. And he's great to. What's funny is Steve has his, like, when I play with Steve, I know the Steve dynamic, and I know, and I'm sure you know this too. He's not very. He's not very. How do I put this into a term? Like, you can kind of like follow what he's doing, but then he's going to throw in a da 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 da. There's going to be some weird off time thing coming in or coming out of something. That's, you expect the unorthodox from him. He'll do a weird turnaround that you weren't expecting, or hit something an odd number of times. That's his style. He's not just 4 4 4 4. And I think the difference, if you listen to the early Frankenstein stuff, like the stuff on Time Is Now and Conquers the World, that was primarily Jim and Sal. Mostly Jim, Sal a lot, a little bit of Dan, but that was the Jim Foster style of writing, and then the later stuff, the Steve Miller style of writing, different.
Yeah.
Very different. Have you picked up on that stuff, like from Buzz of 1,000 Volts? You
Yeah, there's
know,
definitely there's definitely a stylistic change. You know, that Buzz of 1,000 Volts album in particular, I consider it night and day compared to Time Is Now. I mean, it could be a different band in a lot of ways, not just personnel,
yeah,
sound. Like, I mean, Dan too wrote Dead by Dawn on that record. That doesn't sound like early EF, you know?
no, it doesn't. Well, Dan was don't forget, Dan came out of that goth thing with,
Right.
like, and Dan was a huge Sam Hain fan, still is. So
Mhm.
that was a big thing for him, I guess. Um, and Steve is a lot of that, like that kind of like that jumpy type of stuff, like I was just talking about. Whereas the Jim stuff was, it wasn't until we got to Burn Bright, Burn Fast, which is the last official record that I played on,
Mhm.
where I wrote some songs, Steve wrote some songs. Like, to me, that is the closest to the original EF as you were going to get at that point.
Right.
You're familiar with Burn Bright, the Burn Bright
Yeah,
album?
and I agree. I think, there's definitely a Jim Foster, post Jim Foster sound to EF. I dug the Carl era, but it was a different band. It was
Mm-hmm.
just a different vibe. Like,
The
listen to,
dynamic changed. The dynamic changed.
yeah, like the song "The Mess" off of the Buzz record, like that middle section, that bum ba bum
Mm-hmm.
ba bum ba bum ba
Yeah,
bum. First time I heard that, I'm like, what the fuck is this? I mean, I loved
yeah,
it. I'm like, it
yeah.
ain't Demolition Joyride, you know what I
No,
mean?
no, no. And like I said, that was the Carl and Rob era. So kind of like a band, like, I'm not going to use the Misfits as a example, but unfortunately I am. Um, different records with different people could have been different bands. That Buzz of 1,000 Volts could have been a band under a different name. It wasn't like EF, but I think that's I see. I think you can only take that stuff so far. Maybe you know, the Ramones and Motorhead and AC/DC, okay, they made a career out of all their records kind of being similar. But I liked I liked the experimentation that they did with the other guys. I wasn't a big fan of it compared to the older stuff, but then once I got back in and we started writing and recording again, um, like Burn Bright Burn Fast is probably my favorite EF album. And not just because I played on it or because I, you know, played guitar or wrote or whatever. I just think I think that is the as compared, like I love Time Is Now and Conquers the World, but I think that was like the best thing that we had done or the band had done since that. I think that kind of solidified the EF sound, the traditional EF sound once again, my
Yeah,
opinion.
it definitely was the closest the band came post Time Is Now Conquers the World, for sure.
And don't forget, there was covers on that record too. You know, we covered Candy-O
Right.
and Talk Talk, the Music Machine song, and Moving Targets, Flo and Eddie. You know, that was like a stretch, like 3 covers on one album. You
Mm.
know, we were working, like we were, you know, we were playing and touring, and it was like, okay, we're gonna do this cover, and boom, you know, we just knock it out. Like the band had a lot of momentum at that point. You know, like we were just rolling, rolling, rolling all the time, playing, touring. You know, it was like it was no big deal for us. And we lost Dan, and Bill Gill came in to play bass, and we didn't miss a step. You know, we
Yeah.
just kept right on moving. You know, there was no downtime. It was, you know, it was a that end run for me was a good run. You know, those 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, was pretty productive. More so than the first couple of years.
Yeah. And again, I saw you guys at the Echo that one time, and a year later they played the Knitting Factory with the Ads. Yeah, it was with the Ads in 2005. And then you and Bill Gill were in the band when I saw you the first time in LA. Hollywood, a year later, it was Dan again and Rob again.
Mm,
You know, it's a magnet, man. It just keeps
yeah.
pulling people in.
You know, it was weird. Like, I don't even know why. Like, Sal just called me up one day and he's like, we're going to Ohio. We got a couple of shows. Rob can't do it. You know, you want to do it? And I was like, okay. Went down to Kevin's, rehearsed, you know, and I expected and Carl wasn't there. You know, Carl was Rob's buddy. So I guess they just kind of like bailed out at the same time because everybody does that. Like, that's a weird, like, you're in it for a while and then you just not in it anymore. Like you've had it, you know. And I think those guys have just had it. Like Carl never came back, but Rob did,
Yeah.
you know. And Dan left and came back a bunch of times, and you know, and Steve too. And you know, like that's just the way. That's just the dynamic of how that band works. I had played a couple of shows with them. Chris Lynn was in on bass for a while
Right. Yeah.
before and after Dan, and he was in and out. And they had a couple of different drummers. Like Rob came back for a while and then he left. And they had the revolving door, including yourself.
Right.
Um, I don't remember the other guys' names really.
They had Mike Mindless from the Skulls for a while.
Mike was in on bass for a while. You know, rest in peace. He was a great guy. And then they got what's his name? Mike Lincoln. You know, the guy with the cymbals way up here.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know? And I was really surprised at that, honestly, because I knew Mike from Sticky from New York. He played in this band Sticky in the 90s. They were a great band. Georgie Seville,
Oh yeah.
great band. And he was perfect for that, you know, but he was the wrong EF drummer, in my opinion. You know, he was not the right drummer for EF, but he was there for a long time, you know. And then what I started to say before was a few years ago, they were getting ready to do a small European tour. And, you know, Steve called me and he's like, Mike's out, you know, do you want to do the tour? And I was like, I don't know. Like, is it four of us or five of us? And he's like, I don't know. I think it's going to be five. Like Dan's friend Jamie's going to come in and play guitar. And I'm like, okay, five people means the money is split five ways. Forget it. I'm out. I'm not doing it. Because I didn't really need to, you know. And it's not that I didn't want to play with those guys. It was just like it was going to be a lot of work for just one or two shows or whatever it was, and I just really didn't feel like going on the road anymore, you know. Um, so yeah, I just they asked me and I said no, and that was it.
Yeah.
And that was the end.
Yeah. I want to talk about Rick Rick because
Yeah.
I've been for way too many years now. It's the curse of being an author. It takes fucking forever to finish a book. But I've been working on one on Rick for years, like years and years. And hopefully it'll come out probably within a year's time. That's my goal. I never met Rick, because we were like a couple months apart,
Mhm.
um, because I think you had played with Rick, and then they brought in Eric from Murphy's
Yeah,
Law.
Eric Arcee. Yeah, he was another
Yeah,
one that played in EF.
yeah, it's endless. But Rick, fascinating person, great singer. I mean, incredible for the material he did. And you guys did the Monster EP with
Yeah,
him that Mad Mark Rude did the album cover for.
yeah, yeah.
And so kind of a twofold question. What are your recollections of working with Rick? And two, how did you end up singing a lead vocal on that record?
Well, Rick, we during the Scotty era, we did Out There, which was an F word song.
Right. Rick's band.
So when we would play in Orange County, Rick would come and Sal told him, I don't know if he had heard it or if he knew, but Sal said, would you come up and sing Out There with us? And he did it a couple of times. And it was like, it was great. This guy's coming up to sing Rick. I mean, you're into that Beach Boulevard stuff. That's like, it's mind blowing. So he he came to Jersey to do an album, and I don't remember. Oh, I no, I do remember. I met him. I met him in California, and he was a sweetheart, really great guy. Very soft spoken guy. Very kind of shy, and just Southern California, laid back. When he was on stage, though, he was an animal. So we had a talk one night, and it was like, why don't we try to get him to do an album with us? Because everybody loved him, especially Sal and Dan, you know, and it was right around that time that Scotty had left or he was planning on leaving and I was still in. So Sal and Dan, we got me, Sal, Dan, and Jim wrote songs specifically for a Rick Electric Frankenstein album. So they were EF songs. They weren't Rick songs. They weren't in his style. They were in our style. Sent him the tapes, and he worked on it that way by himself. He would send us back what he, had arranged and stuff, and he would ask us to make certain changes and stuff. So that went on for a couple of months before he even came out. But then when he came out to Jersey, he stayed with Sal. I don't know if Dan was there or not, but he definitely stayed at Sal's house for like a week. And he wasn't feeling good. I remember meeting him. We recorded in Hoboken, Water Music or Waterfront, one of those places. And we did the basic tracks, early. And then Rick came in to sing and he had all his music prepared and everything. And he instantly lost his voice. Because he was really pushing to try to kind of be EF about it, you know? So but he wasn't feeling good. He was like, he was like taking aspirins and Advil and he was not himself. Or so I was told by Sal, he's something's not right with this guy. and he lost his voice. And if you listen to that record, I think it took him a couple of days because he went back and double tracked a lot of his vocals, you know, especially on Used to Know. Um, and we did it Savage, or we did one of his songs. Um, I forget. I think there was only like 5 or 6 songs on that record, but we wanted to do, it was Dan or Jim's idea to do Queen Wasp, you know. So, you know, because we loved that song, but Rick was gone already. Rick, like, you know, he did his stuff and left. So it was like, you know, will you sing it? And I was like, yeah, why not? I'll sing it. So that was how I ended up doing the vocals on that. But I didn't see Rick very long during that time period when he was here. I don't even think we went in and maybe we went in and rehearsed once at Sounds before we went to the studio, but he wasn't there the whole time. He came later. You know, we did the basic tracks and then he came in a little bit later to do his vocals. And he really, it wasn't his thing. Like you know, we kind of, I always felt like we kind of put him in a bad spot because EF stuff was not his style. Well, when we were doing his material, it was great. But for him to try to sing our stuff, I think was, and they later on, a couple of months later, did a show with him at Court Tavern.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, there's a recording of that. That's the one that RC played drums
That
for.
right? Yeah, Goat came down and I was out, and between me and Rob was Eric Arce, you know,
Right.
for 5 minutes. And I remember they did half EF set and half Rick Elric set,
Mhm.
and they had to at one point they had to switch guitars to a down tuned to make it easier for him to sing because the EF stuff was really not in his range. You know, he was not a Steve Miller or a Scott Wilkins.
No,
You
no,
know,
no.
definitely not. He had his own style, and the stuff that he had done with F Word and, you know, his other solo stuff was a lot different. So he was kind of put in an odd spot there to, you know, but you know, tall, you know, uh, just a great front man. You know, great front man. He made that video that, you know, Blackout was one of the songs that we did with him, which, you know, he um, made his own little video in the mortuary because he was an undertaker.
Right.
That was his job, you know. Um, and you can hear me doing, you know, I'm singing Blackout with him in the chorus, and I'm screaming it because he didn't have his voice really at that point. If you listen to if you now that I've said this to you, if you go back and listen, you can hear he's straining a lot, and he had to come back like the next day and double track his vocals because he had lost his voice. You know, trying to, whether it was because it was the material or because he hadn't sang in a long time, you know, he wasn't ready for it. You know, and then he did that show with them, and then not too long after that, he died. You know, he had a brain tumor, and then he wasn't feeling well when he was in Jersey. You know, and he was undiagnosed at that point. He was just like he thought he just had a headache because of the music or because of the travel, or you
Right.
know. But Sal kind of picked up on. He's like, yeah, he doesn't seem right. You know.
Yeah. Still a young man too when he
Yeah,
passed.
I think he was maybe around 40, maybe
Yeah.
early 40s, or
I think it was 40 on the nose, actually. Yeah.
yeah, a lot younger than I am now. So, you know, lucky to be on this side of the soil.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I'm 46,
I got 10 on you, kid.
But you remember the Blackout video, right? Like you said, he
Yes.
recorded it, and his fiance at the time, Kipling, is the young lady who's unclothed running through the
Mm,
mortuary.
mm,
And the official video, all that's kind of blacked out, right? You don't really see much of her, kind of.
probably, yeah.
And when I started writing about Rick, I had met her. She um, is a very nice lady actually. I haven't talked to her for a while, but she's a really sweet person. And I'd gone to her apartment, and she actually gave me some Rick records I didn't have, which was very sweet of her. Because it's not like this stuff's going to get reissued or anything. But
Mm.
she was very kind. But she showed
Didn't,
me she showed me the video, but it was the uncensored version of the video, like
oh, okay.
blacked out.
Yeah.
It was a bit socially awkward to be like watching it next to her apartment. And she's like Starkers in the video, and I'm like, yeah, it looks great.
But that was funny because the EF part of it was recorded at Kevin's old studio with Carl and
Carl,
Rob.
right.
Yeah. And they weren't on it, but
No,
they were in the video at the time.
yeah,
So that was kind of funny. But those songs I think were really, and we would do those later on, like Blackout we would do with Steve.
yeah,
Um, I don't remember what else we would do with Steve from that record, but that was a good little, and that was kind of like my exit out of Frankenstein in I think it was '98 at that point.
yeah,
From '95 to '98, and then I left. But what a high note to go out on, doing a record with Rick Rick.
yeah.
You
I
know,
love that record. I know his voice. You can hear it because I've listened to a lot of the other stuff too. You can tell he's pushing it, but it kind of works. He got like a rasp in his
oh, he
voice.
did have yeah,
He
but
didn't have otherwise.
yeah, but he like we felt bad for him, because he was really trying hard, but it just wasn't in his range. That other, I just got back, bro. He was like that real deep, and now he was like, I ain't no good for you. You know what I mean? Like he was really, it was definitely an A+ for effort. And it sounds great. Don't get me wrong. I think it sounds great, but we all kind of felt bad for him. Like, this guy's really hurting, to do it. He really gave it. He gave it 110%. He
Yeah,
was a trooper, though. He pulled through. He pushed through it.
yeah. Rest in peace, Rick Rick, one of a kind singer.
Definitely.
Um, we've been at this for a while, so I want to bring things up to the present tense here, and kind of wrap up with where things are now with Voice of Doom, because Voice of Doom did reform a few years ago, and you guys have been pretty damn prolific ever since. There's quite a few records out since
It
you
was
guys.
about 10. It's about 10 years ago now. At this point, now that I think it was 2014, we revitalized it.
Yeah, so it's been 10 years. You've got Frankie in the band from the old days.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Haim from Holshot is
Right.
singing now.
He's
You're on
singing. Yeah.
guitar. So what kind of led to the second life of VOD?
Uh, I ran into Ricky Blades one night, who was on the record with London. I ran
Mhm.
into him in a show in New York, and it was one of those weird things where like you look at somebody and you're like, I think I know him, and you guys are looking at each other in like an odd way. And then we just, I said, you're Ricky. He's like, yeah, John. I'm like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. We started talking. And I said, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm not really doing much of anything. He was working and, I was like, oh, VOD. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I got to be, it's so funny I run into you because I'm actually thinking about bringing VOD back because Haim and I had talked about it for years. Haim's like, remember that VOD song? He's like, I love that song. Remember that VOD song? You should have did that and blah, blah, blah. And so it was always like on our list of things to do. Like one day we're going to do this. So I said, you know what? I said, got Haim, Frankie's around, Ricky, a friend of his, play drums, you know, let's do it. Why not? Let's fuck around. Let's make some noise. So, we started rehearsing and I had a bunch of material that I'd not done anything with. So I brought all these songs down and we didn't think anything was going to happen with it, but we were like, you know what, let's try and do something with it. So we, you know, started rehearsing and his friend Carl was good drummer. And eventually we recorded some stuff that we were just going to demo. And then I was like, let's put it out. Joe had Pyrrhic Victory Records, still does. And Joe's like, I'll put it out. So we put out the first record, VOD 3. I think there was 6 songs on it. Then after that, Carl was gone, Ricky was gone. We wanted to play out. So, okay, Joe and Ryan from the 65s, Joe played bass, Ryan played drums. We started doing that, and just recording, playing. But we kept the playing to, we wanted to keep it seasonal, like Monster Cereal. you know, around Halloween, you know, because we're like a Halloween band. So, you know, we're gonna lay low and just write songs and record, you know, for the year. And then once the end of the year comes, we'll go into the studio, we'll record, put out a record, play a couple shows. And that's kind of the way it's been for the past since 2014.
Hmm.
You know, Ed Rossler's been playing bass with us for about a year now. You know, Joe's kind of doing his own thing. Um, and after we met Robbie is when we started doing some stuff with him, you know, started playing some shows with him. And he's got a little studio in his house where we've been, you know, recording some new material, you know. So that's kind of where that's gone. You know, we've put out a bunch of stuff. We had some live stuff and something we did in Europe.
Mhm.
And yeah, we've just been chugging along with it. And you know, we're actually scheduled to play. We have a show March 3rd, I think. March 3rd with Brian Baker's band, the Beach Rats or Beach Rats.
I'm thinking which Brian Baker band? He's got like 20.
Yeah, I
Beat.
think it's Beach Rats at Crossroads in Garwood. There's like an all day like benefit show, and VOD is going to play.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and we just did some shows. We did some shows in October with Fear and Morning Noise.
Hmm.
You remember that?
Yeah, I regret not being able to make it down for that.
Those were great. Those were really good shows. Those were good, and Fear was great. And Morning Noise was great. You know, and I'm you know like it's funny like Morning Noise. I mean, obviously they were around before VOD, but like I'm glad to see like Tommy and Chris and you know those guys, you know Steve. Like I'm glad they everybody needs to do. Everybody revisits their old bands at some point. You know, I'm glad they brought that back. It's gone in a different direction now with Robbie. You know,
Right.
and they made some. They recorded a bunch of new material and you know played with the Misfits and did some good shows. You know, so I'm glad to see that that's back. It doesn't I don't feel like, you know, like VOD is the only like band from the old days that's back again. You know what I mean? Like it's nice to see other guys still doing their old shit again.
Yeah, and it's cool too. In the case of both your bands, you're doing new stuff. It's not like let's play the same set from 1983.
Yeah.
It's like, in Morning Noise's case, they've got a great new front man who writes songs. So, they're definitely going to capitalize on that and take it in
Mm-hmm.
a direction. I know you guys, because, Haim's been sending me stuff for years, and it's always like, oh, I got to do something on Voice of Doom. So I'm glad that we're doing this interview because I can pay him back finally for sending me all those records. But I mean, there's been a fair amount of stuff, so it's cool that you guys are doing it now and you're doing it for, because let's face it, that whole horror punk thing in Jersey, yeah, it's never going to go away. It gets bigger every year.
Yeah.
And it's cool that the people who kind of, brought it up to that level, whose names aren't Glenn Danzig and Jerry Only, the other guys are are pushing it forward too. I mean, for
Mm,
me as a fan, it's just nice to
mm,
see this shit going around because I missed it the first time. I mean,
yeah.
I was 6 years old when the Misfits broke up in
Mm.
'83. So, you know,
See, I wasn't really there either. I was too young. Like Frankie was there. Frankie Fender, you know, who's 9 years older than me, you know, he saw the Misfits a couple of times back in the day. You know, I think he was at that Hitsville Christmas show
oh
with
wow.
Black Flag. You know, he saw the original Undead. Um, he was around for a lot of that stuff. You know, like the like Thunders and you know all the shows in New York. He was there. You know, him and this guy Bob who played in VOD for a while. You know, they were there then.
Yeah.
So you know, Frankie was kind of like my lead in to that type of stuff. Um, and I went to Bergen Tech High School, which ironically enough is the same high school that Glenn Danzig went to. Obviously, many years later, but you know, I would see the kids with Misfit shirts, you know, and they were from like Lodi and Hasbrook Heights. And I saw this one kid with a Rosemary's Babies T-shirt, you know,
Wow.
and I started, inquiring like about that stuff. And I remember asking Frankie, like, did you ever see the Misfits or you hear the Misfits? He's like, oh yeah, you know, he gave me a whole big thing. And then I started buying their records, and same thing with Rosemary's Babies. They had their record in some magazine you could send away for, and that's how I started corresponding with Eerie Von,
Right.
right at the end of that and the beginning of Sam Hain. So that was my, 1983 was my gateway into, or 82, I think, or maybe 83 was my gateway into the Misfits. And I worked backwards. I
Yeah.
started with Earth AD and then went backwards through the catalog, you know. But I have to say, Earth AD and Static Age, my two favorite Misfits albums, without a doubt.
Yeah. Interesting bookends, because they're totally stylistically different, you know, just different sound, different vibe. It's hard to believe it's the same band. And they did all
Yeah.
that 6 years.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
crazy, the kind of change they went through. But yeah, I mean, it's in our DNA. If we're from New Jersey and you like punk rock, you got to know the Misfits. I mean, it's, good pizza and
and you
Misfits.
gotta know Lodi Pizza. So
Yeah, yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, I love that play. And Kaprowski mentioned this when he was on about how like people make pilgrimages to like Lodi
yeah,
Pizza and they go. It's fantastic.
yeah, yeah. We take advantage of it because we're right here, so we can go there anytime we want.
Right.
But people do, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's cool. Cardi's closed because Benson passed away. I don't know if they're going to reopen. But there's not a lot of stuff from the old days that's left around. Lodi Pizza is one of them. Thankfully, still there.
I mean, look, it's wonderful that guys we knew, you know, at different points growing up in Jersey, Mo, Glenn, I mean, Mo and Doyle, I've known since I was 17. The fact that they're doing this, like playing arenas and people are traveling to see Lodi Pizza, like people would go to Liverpool to look at where
Yeah,
Steele's recorded.
yeah.
God bless those guys. I mean, Jerry worked his
Never would have
fucking ass
expected
off
it.
to get there.
Never would have expected that. And it's funny because my wife she's from Garfield, and a lot of her family is from Lodi,
Mhm.
and her grandfather lived next door to the Lodi Pizza people. That family, you know. So it's funny, like, she was familiar with Lodi Pizza before I was, but she didn't know the Misfits connection,
Yeah.
with Lodi Pizza and that whole thing. So we'd go in there, and there would be pictures up on the wall. And meanwhile, her mom or her aunt, they knew the owner and Frank and his father and the kids. And, they were, it was like, oh yeah, Lodi Pizza. They had no idea that all this punk rock stuff was cross pollinating with it from back then.
Yeah. Incredible. My friend, we have talked the ever-loving shit out of all this stuff, man.
2 hours, man.
Well, that's more than double Kaprowski, so fuck him.
Tommy's great.
Oh yeah.
I love Tommy. I love
Yeah,
him.
me
I
too.
love
Don't
him.
tell him that though, even though he'll watch
He
this.
knows. He
Yeah.
knows. He knows.
No,
Tommy's great.
yeah, fantastic. It's so much fun doing that, man, And I've had a lot of fun doing this. It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. It
I'll
was a pleasure.
yeah, it really was, man. And I'll put the Bandcamp link up for Voice of Doom when I post the video. I'll put it in the video
Okay.
description. Are there
All right,
any
cool.
links I should include as well beyond that?
Whatever I sent you in the email, the Facebook, the Discogs bank, whatever I sent you.
Yeah,
I'm not a Heim does all the social media. I don't do anything, I write the songs. He does all that shit. So let him, that whatever he sent me to send you that's it. That's what's out there.
I'll make sure all
You know.
that goes up.
I appreciate it.
Hey, man, I appreciate 2 hours, man. It's been great to catch up.
It's been a lot of fun. I could talk for another I could talk for another two, but I'm sure you want to roll, and we'll leave it at a good spot.
Perhaps we'll do this again sometime.
Definitely. I look forward to it.
Excellent, John. Take care, buddy.
Joel, thank you so much. Take care.
My pleasure.